I do want to go ahead and bring in our special guest. This is his first time here on Sabby Sabs Show. His name is Patrick Henningsen. He's a geopolitical analyst. Let's go ahead and bring him in. Hi, Patrick. Thank you so much for joining me.
It's great to be with you, Sabrina. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm so glad you're able to join us. A lot has been happening with Iran. A lot has been happening with the Iran war. You were just in Tehran a couple of weeks ago. What was your experience like? What was it like meeting the Iranian people there? And just to give people a perspective, for those of us here that are in the US, I think a lot of people, more people are waking up, but there's still a lot of propaganda out there about Iran.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Sabrina. I wanted to get there because the United States was sending naval assets into the Indian Ocean, the Gulf of Oman, and Trump was threatening to attack. And at the same time, there were high-level nuclear negotiations going on. So we all knew that from the same thing happened in June. There were high-level negotiations. Oman was the intermediary, and the U.S. and Israel used the negotiations as cover for a sneak attack. So I fully expected that was going to happen again, although we hoped that it wouldn't. Unfortunately, it did. So I wanted to get there before the airports closed and before there wouldn't be an opportunity potentially to get back for a while. There was always a risk. So I did have an opportunity to go. And I was there about 1 week before the bombs were dropping, more or less, and I was given a short stay visa because of the security situation. And as a Western journalist, obviously they didn't want us to be stranded there unnecessarily, not able to get out. And but I was able to do quite a lot of reporting while I was there. So first thing I'll say right off the bat, I went there as well to investigate the protests because there were a lot of crazy claims made in the U.S. and are still being made by everybody, politicians and the media, that Iran's massacred Democratic protesters and 30,000, 50,000, 70,000, whatever, 10,000. Then they dialed the number down eventually to like 2,000 or 3,000. And of course, having looked at the evidence on that, I can categorically say all those claims are fabricated, completely fake, absolute propaganda. But we've seen all this before. I've been studying color revolutions and false flag attacks and soft and smart power for 15 years. So it's very similar to the Maidan massacre that was used to initiate a civil war in Ukraine, but also during the Arab Spring and false reporting about what was going on in Libya or Syria. And we've seen all this before. So that's what they use, is they're using this as the moral justification for the war. Because just quickly, as an aside here, if you have populist anti-war people on the right, the types of people, independent voters that voted for Donald Trump, or centrists on the left, mainstream anti-war Democrats, who would look at the situation where they just assassinated the Ayatollah in Iran and say, well, and they don't like the war, but it's good that the regime, the leader is dead, because like Saddam Hussein, even though we invaded Iraq, at least as Tony Blair said, the world's a better place without Saddam. So therefore it was worth it. And it's the same type of mentality. And that's why atrocity propaganda, whether you're looking at October 7th, the Israelis putting out 40 beheaded babies and mass rape, and all of these are targeted at Western audiences. And they want to manufacture consent for the war to create an underlying kind of moral argument that, well, we don't like the war, but at least the regime is out, or at least the terrorists are dead, or the world's a safer place, and they can kind of do a compromise on. Same with Iran. This is the background noise, or the backdrop for the war. And whether Americans are for or against the war, they'll tolerate it if they believe that it was done with some sort of a moral justification, even if it's only halfway. So that's why the propaganda is so important. That's why I had to go to understand that for myself, and to see 2 million people out on the street supporting the Ayatollah in the government afterwards. And I was there at the national rally, and I reported from there as well. And that one of those clips went viral. And I received a massive backlash, obviously, from certain corners for being there, daring to be a Western reporter, independent journalist, to go there and actually see from my own eyes and then relay that. That's a terrible thing, according to some people. How dare I back? You're a mouthpiece for the quote regime. Anyway, it's not my first rodeo, so I did what I was supposed to do, and yeah.
Yeah, and speaking of that manufacturing consent, this is a big one. Saturday night, it was reported that the island of Diego Garcia was struck, and I want people to hear the way that I believe this is the BBC, the way that they talked about this. Dropside News has been covering a lot of this information in real time. What they are trying to say now, they're trying to use this attack to say, see, Iran lied. They can hit further and they can also attack us here in the United States, also the UK. By the way, Iran is denying this attack, but listen to the way the media talked about this.
Of the missiles here, that again, if you see what's published, it talks about 2,000 miles being the maximum range of the Iranian ballistic missile program. When I was in the military, it was pretty clear that Iran wanted a missile capable of reaching continental United States. And it isn't about just having a bigger missile, because obviously a lot of its flight track is through space, so it doesn't have any drag. But there's lots of complications once you start going long distances. But this distance here, about 4,000 kilometers, as you say, it's over 2,000 miles. And therefore, they were very successfully able to strike that far, which raised the question, how much further could those missiles actually strike?
How many miles from Iran to the United States?
Well, I think you're about 12,000 kilometers, so you're talking about significantly more. But as I say, actually, it's more about, once you get the missile into space, it's free floated, and then you've got to control it on the way down. So some of it is more about technology than it is about the size of the missiles. And it's been long declared that this was a capability that Iran had up its sleeve. I think what's interesting is the fact that they didn't actually hit their targets. It's also the news this morning seems to be making a big thing about this being a UK base. We have to point out, I think there are less than 100 UK personnel there. It's largely dominated by the United States. And given that the United States is the lead of the fight, the war in Iran, it's an entirely legitimate target if you look at it through Iran's lens. It does appear that defensive systems have worked.
But as you were saying, expensively so, right?
Oh, very expensive. But what price do you pay on protecting yourself? I think the other interesting thing is that there's a lot of political commentary about whether our government was right not to side with America. And you go, the worry is always that if you do, you become a target. If Iran does have missiles that are capable of reaching the UK, then we would be very worried, because we have no ballistic missile defense capability in this country. And therefore, this morning, rather than being Diego Garcia, which America has been launching attacks from, if we were actually involved in the war, we could be having a missile winging its way to London. We could certainly track it, but we couldn't do anything about it.
So this is what the mainstream or corporate media is, the message that they're putting out into the ether at this point in time. They're trying to scare people. That was the first attack that I heard about Saturday evening. I want to hear from you, Patrick, here. First of all, again, Iran is denying this strike on Diego Garcia, but it seems very apparent that they're trying to scare people in the US and also trying to scare people in the UK and say, look, they lied. They can attack us too.
Well, there's two ways to look at this. Now, when I first saw this report, I took it on face value, assuming that Iran has the capability and has intermediate range ballistic missiles that can go more than 2,000 miles and could potentially hit a target like Diego Garcia, which is in the southern Indian Ocean. So I just took it at face value, and it wouldn't surprise me at all, because why would that shock anybody if they've already targeted 24 U.S. military facilities around the Middle East, 17 particularly around the Persian Gulf? Why, that's just another U.S. base. It's just a little farther away. Why all the commotion in the Western media? And that does make me a little suspicious. And then when the Iranian denial came, saying, "Hey, look, we didn't. These weren't ours." I would expect Iran to be gloating about it if it was theirs. So, I mean, there's another red flag. So that means the Iranian denials of this are very credible. And what's more credible is the reaction, as you can see from the British intelligence implanted talking points onto the news desk there. It looks like Sky News or probably Sky News. And don't be fooled by the posh accent. You know, it sounds really intelligent. It sounds great, but it's just bog standard propaganda. This is exactly the same argument they used for to get Britain to go shoulder to shoulder, Blair with Bush for the Iraq War. Is they claimed that Saddam Hussein had missiles that could launch in 45 minutes or less. That was the headline on every single tabloid. 45 minutes or less, and a big picture of evil Saddam and a Scud missile that could hit the U.S. base, or sorry, the British base in Cyprus. In Cyprus. That was in 2003. They used that. That was the main driver, that single talking point, to justify why it was an imminent threat, and Britain had to then go all in with the Americans. And the Americans couldn't have done it without the British because they needed a coalition or some semblance of a coalition internationally. So this is a repeat. This is a carbon copy of the Saddam 45 minutes or less hoax that got us everybody into the Iraq War. That's the first thing. Then I look at the headlines in Britain. I look at the Telegraph, which is establishment, military, leans for the military, leans for the intelligence services, leans for war generally. It's conservative rag. The nickname is the Tory Graph in Britain, okay? The Telegraph. And the Telegraph has said, the headline is, Britain now in reach of Iran's missiles. So, and then the subtext, now we know it's probably a false flag, because the subheadline was Starmer accused of covering up the Diego Garcia event. So what they're doing, this is an Israeli and U.S. planted talking point into the media to pressure the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, to be more hawkish and to get behind the U.S. with Iran to help with the Straits of Hormuz, et cetera, to allow the U.S. to use their bases for B-1 bombing raids on targets in the Straits of Hormuz. Now, that decision's already been made, but what this does, it provides the political justification for Britain allowing its bases to be used for long-range U.S. bombing missions to hit targets to quote, open the Straits of Hormuz. They've used this Diego Garcia. I'm fully confident this is a false flag. Probably the Israelis. It's probably from an Israeli submarine. And there's no details about the timing of the missiles. There's no satellite tracking. They claim that one of them was intercepted by a U.S. interceptor and the other one failed in mid-flight, but there's no details about the telemetry on this. And normally this stuff would be all broken down on, infographics by now. And we see nothing. So I think this is just a steaming heap of propaganda refuse that is being clearly used to discipline the British, get them in line a little bit. And then also, here's the other thing, Sabrina, the Chagos Islands, Diego Garcia, this is in the news because they just won a judgment at the International Courts of Justice for the illegal eviction, ethnic cleansing by the Americans and the British of Chagos residents to make this unsinkable aircraft carrier base between 1968 and 73. They basically turfed them out. They promised them reparations. They promised them this and that. They gave them nothing. They just sent them and forced settled them to British Mauritius colony and the French Seychelles. And they gave them nothing. They stole everything. They just turfed them out. And that has been, so now there's pressure internationally to give back the Chagos Islands to the inhabitants, to allow them to resettle, and to maybe take the base, dismantle that base. So let me tell you, there's a lot going on with Diego Garcia. So I just thought I'd give you the broader picture there.
It's very interesting. For those who are not aware, it was reported Sunday morning that Donald Trump is now trying to get a 24-hour ceasefire. This is an embarrassment, really, for the United States. But the other attack that happened Saturday night is this one, and I think this is the one that a lot of people are talking about, is the town of Dimona. After the Dimona hit, an Iranian missile just devastated Arad. So here are some of I want to show people some of the videos, they're very short, of some of the destruction that happened Saturday. Yeah, and for those who are not aware, one of the gentlemen that recorded these videos, I believe he was from India. He has been arrested by the Israeli police because they are mad at him because he recorded this destruction. Just another way they try to control the narrative. But you'll see it here. This guy, Ahadi, says if you look closely, you can see entrances to the tunnels and weapon depots in those Dimona buildings. So I want people to see this as well.
קדימה, המשימה החשובה, ביצוע סריקות. קדימה. ביצוע סריקות מהירות בכל הנקודות לדווח.
Yeah, so you guys can see the destruction. There's one more here that I want people to see. This was Fox News, and they're talking about how Israel's Iron Dome failed.
An Iranian missile made it through the Israeli air defenses and came down in the southern Israeli town of Dimona, and people are injured. Now, Dimona is in the southern desert there, sort of near the tip of the Dead Sea and very near the Natanz Nuclear Research Center. No word that anything nuclear was hit, but we do have word that a lot of people are injured, as many as 40 injuries. That includes a 10 or 12-year-old boy who has shrapnel injuries and is in severe condition. Most of the injuries are light. They do count people who get injured running to the shelters among the injuries when you have a missile strike on Iran.
So I just want people to see this and understand, because from what I understand, so this town, Dimona, is supposed to be a nuclear town. And they're mentioning the people that were injured, but let's just all go back to Gaza for a second. It feels to me as though Israel's trying to have a rebrand of its own, and they want people to feel bad. And they're trying to say Iran is committing war crimes. It's laughable at this point in time to me, Patrick, considering everything that happened to Gaza. But the Dimona strike, it was a big one, and we can't show all the strikes on here because you guys know how YouTube is. But on social media, you can see those videos where those were powerful hits that Iran put on Israel Saturday night.
Yeah, I think the first laugh was Mike Tobin there. I forgot what network, looks like Fox or something. He said that was near the Natanz Nuclear Research Center, which is actually in Iran. So I think he got his geography mixed up. Maybe I read that wrong, but it did seem like he didn't know what he was talking about, but it is Fox, so we'll give them a little bit of leeway on that. So first thing, Israel has a settlement, which they plopped there in Dimona. And so they have think of it like a company town, like, Lockheed Martin, Lawrence Livermore in California. They have company towns, Sandia Labs in New Mexico, etc. This is the same. And so they use the settlers as human shields. The Israelis do this all the time. So this is the very thing they accuse the Palestinians of doing in Gaza. Anyway, it's funny that the Diego Garcia story was a very, very convenient distraction. If you noticed, Tom Cotton and all the hawks in Washington were just crowing, how dare the Iranians fire at Diego Garcia. That proves there was an imminent threat. They can reach out and touch the U.S. shores. And no talk about Dimona. Now, you'd think that the Americans would be screaming from the rooftops about a nuclear site being hit in Israel by the Iranians. I mean, you'd think, because that's a game changer, not only from the safety point of view, the potential environmental impact of that. For Israel, obviously the West doesn't care when Iranian sites get hit, but this should register on their radar. But they don't mention that the Iranians were retaliating because the Israelis just hit the Natanz nuclear facility in Iran. So this wasn't just out of the blue. This was a like-for-like retaliation. But it was a reciprocal move. The Iranians are very measured on the escalation ladder, as we all can see now, unlike the U.S. and the Israelis that are kind of wild and reckless. So that's the first thing. The Diego Garcia story gave cover to this, so because nobody wants to talk about Dimona. Why? Because Dimona houses nuclear warheads, undeclared nuclear warheads by the Israelis. So, and this is like a verboten topic in America. You're not allowed to talk about it. So now they have to talk about it. now, or at least some people are having to address this issue now. Mention Dimona. As soon as you say Dimona, you're talking about warheads. And that comes to the very core, because the entire U.S. argument is that Iran posed an imminent nuclear threat. They could have build a bomb in 2 weeks. Okay. And here we have between 90 and 300 undeclared warheads that the Israelis are harboring and using to blackmail countries, to blackmail the United States. All reports show and suggest, and I think they're credible, that in June, Israel issued a nuclear blackmail threat to the U.S. if they didn't come in with Operation Midnight Hammer to end the 12-day war, that Israel was going to end it by dropping a nuke on the Iranians. And that forced Donald Trump's hand. Now, I fully think that that's a credible report. It does coincide and jibe with Seymour Hersh's book, The Samson Option, and so forth, and all these other reports. So that's why Dimona is amazing, this story, because they're not going to be able to suppress this. And it looks like to me that, and from the reports you showed, the video report you showed there with that video that Hadi Nasrallah retweeted there, is that they were targeting a bunker. So if that was the underground research facility, those would be might have something to do with Israel's nuclear weapons, their secret arsenal. So for me, that's very significant. It shows two things. Iran issued a warning beforehand. They said evacuate. So this is what Israel does, and when Israel does this, they claim that they're the world's most moral army, because they issue advances of their attack and tell people to evacuate. So that means the IRGC is also in the running for the world's most moral army, because they're giving notice before the strike. So that's the first thing. The other thing is the fact that the Israelis are not going to talk about their own nuclear arsenal. That alone, listen, it's a cat's out of the bag now. We have to talk about these things. And how long are the U.S. and the Western media going to suppress this conversation that one country in the Middle East is allowed to have a lethal nuclear arsenal, and not allowing the International Atomic Energy Agency inspectors to visit, to have any regulatory supervision over it, or that they're not a signatory to the nuclear non-proliferation treaty, which every other country is? Why is Israel allowed to not be accountable on any level? That to me is just the fundamental problem to address the imbalance of this region, of the conversation, and to pull the rhetoric into check. This hawkish rhetoric against Iran that might have a nuclear weapon from a country that is harboring a secret nuclear arsenal. I mean, this is kind of insane when you think about it, but yet it just continues.
This is something also that John F. Kennedy wanted to inspect when he was president, for those who are not aware. He wanted to go to Israel and inspect these facilities, but Israel kept finding ways to push back. And the next thing you know, John F. Kennedy was killed. So this has been an issue for quite some time. There were also some hits here. Again, I mentioned Arad, Iran's strike on Arad. Israel has a large fire here. Just want to show people. Again, like the targets came straight through. The Iron Dome is only so strong and it can't stop everything. But they were able to get a lot of hits to Israel Saturday evening. A lot of this was going on. There's another one here just to show everybody.
عراد إسرائيل بقاع يشرى طلعوا لي بإيش
זה הרס באחד הדירות. הרס באחד הדירות פה. למעלה יש פצועים חבל על הזמן.
Just so people can see the damage there. And again, people have to remember that they're arresting people for recording these videos because they don't want the public to see the damage that Iran is doing, because it doesn't fit with their narrative. But Ben Gvir, Patrick, managed to emerge. This guy has been hiding for quite some time. I do want people to see this. He came out after these hits on Dimona.
אדוני השר, רגע, תנו לנו לצלם בבקשה. חבר'ה, תבואו רגע לתקשורת.
And where do you think he has been, Patrick? I'm pretty sure you've seen the videos of Netanyahu when we were all questioning whether this was AI or not or whatever. But Ben Gvir has also been absent for quite some time, and then all of a sudden he reemerges Saturday evening.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess he's recovered from his injuries. Reports suggest that he was targeted in an Iranian missile strike and escaped with his life, barely. So I'm sure that that shocked him and would shock the hardliners in Israel. But as you can see, Iran has excellent intelligence in terms of their bank of targets in Israel. I mean, and people underestimate the Iranian. They think, oh, they're getting it from the Russians, or they're getting it from the Chinese. No, Iran's intelligence around the region is excellent. It's just that they can't act with impunity in the same way that the U.S. and Israel can, because if they do, then they will sort of reap an unholy backlash from these powers that would give an excuse to obliterate the country, full stop. But as it is, they're managing the escalation ladder. But what's interesting about this was Benjamin Netanyahu arrived onto the scene, and he gave a sort of piece to camera, and you have to listen very closely to it because, and I pay attention to Netanyahu because he is probably in history, probably the world's greatest liar, or with the most blatant liar. He is a propagandist of the highest order. So I listen closely because whatever Benjamin Netanyahu is pushing, that is basically the lines that they're working on. And what he said was interesting. He said that, first of all, this proves that Iran is a vicious terrorist state because they're targeting civilian areas and so forth. Then he says that they've just fired one of their rockets on the holy sites in Jerusalem, targeting the three major monotheistic religions near the Temple Mount. That, I believe, is a hoax. It looked to me from the footage 2 days ago that was an errant Iron Dome interceptor, quite possibly, if not an intentional false flag by the Israelis. Why on earth would Iran want to target the holy sites? But why would Israel want to claim that they did? Of course, Israel wants to create a Sunni versus Shiite schism to turn Sunnis against Shiites, because now the Muslim community, the Ummah globally is coming together because of what the Israelis and the Americans are doing to the region and to Iran. So Israel is desperate to reverse that. I'm sure the Americans are as well. So they want to create this, but there's hardline Israelis, Third Temple cultist fanatics that want to destroy the Al-Aqsa Mosque and to replace it by building a third temple, and likely blame that on Iran to get extra bonus points by creating a sectarian war between Muslims. I mean, so there's Israelis on record saying that they want to do this, or they want this to happen, wink and a nod. How is that going to happen? That's Netanyahu putting that one out. Okay, the next one he said was they just fired on Diego Garcia. Well, we just established earlier, Sabrina, that that's a false flag, or very likely, based on the preponderance of evidence, it does look like it. So that's another Netanyahu point he injects. Then he says they already fired on Cyprus. They're targeting Europe. Well, the Cyprus missile or drone attack has a lot of question marks around it. Iran is not taking credit for that. That looks like, again, a false flag. That was from 2 weeks ago. So there's another one. And then he says they're blocking maritime shipping and they're a threat to all. Europeans need to come in to confront this evil regime. And we need to create conditions for the Iranians to overthrow the regime. So one by one, Netanyahu is the touchstone for propaganda. You just listen to him, look at what he's pushing, and you can bet your bottom dollar that these are just absolute fabrications and lies, deceit of the highest order. And he just proved it again today, yesterday. So, I mean, that's why I would look at those very skeptically, those things that he's saying.
Right. Here's one right here, actually, again. And some people have taken this video and they put it in Google search and they said this is also not a recent video. But for those wondering what was said, here is his statement here.
If anyone needed an explanation of why Iran is the enemy of civilization and the enemy and the danger to the entire world, you got it in the last 48 hours. In the last 48 hours, they fired a terror weapon on civilians, on children. There's a children's nursery here. There's an old person's home here.
I have to pause. Patrick,
It's too much.
This hypocrisy it's insane to me. Like, and that's the thing, is like, Iran is not attacking civilians, but for him to even say that about anyone else, all of a sudden, I feel like Israel's trying to have this rebrand of we got to protect the civilians and all of this, when they killed all these civilians in Gaza and they killed civilians in Iran. They bombed a school.
No, look at Gaza. It's a hellscape. They've flattened entire cities, housing hundreds of thousands of people. They're carpet bombing South Lebanon. They're invading South Lebanon. They're taking out city blocks in South Beirut as we speak. And this guy has the chutzpah, all smug with his Ray-Ban glasses, to come up here and spread out these platitudes about how Iran is targeting civilians. And look at the old person's home here, the children's hospital there. Israel systematically destroyed dozens of hospitals in Gaza. They blew up all the universities. They bombed all the schools, all the churches, all the mosques. They took out their entire healthcare system systematically. They killed 300 or 250 plus journalists they targeted in Gaza. And this guy will come up here, and it's good enough for American audiences, as we all know, sadly, that there is a large percentage of Americans that will hear that on Fox News or Newsmax or whatever, the Blaze TV, and they'll believe it. They'll think, wow, there's Netanyahu. Look how brave he is. Look, he's just calling out those evil terrorists in Iran. No mention of the fact that the U.S. and Israel started this war. I mean, that's the obvious thing. And for the British, why would you be worried about Iran's ballistic missiles if you had, let's say, a peace treaty with them, if you had peace negotiations, if you had allowed the JCPOA Iran nuclear deal to stay in place, which was brought in by the Obama administration in 2015-16, which was unilaterally withdrawn by the Trump administration, it intentionally at the express orders of Netanyahu himself to Pompeo and Trump's first administration, to provide the excuse to go out and say Iran is developing a nuclear weapon because there's no agreement to hold them into place. Well, the U.S. withdrew from that agreement. That's why the Israelis made them withdraw, because they wanted to create the political conditions to make the false claim that Iran was suddenly pursuing a nuclear weapon, even though multiple U.S. intelligence assessments said that they were not developing a nuclear weapon. So this is just smoke and mirrors, war by deception. The Israelis cannot stop lying. This is, unfortunately, they lie as they wake up and breathe in the morning. And Netanyahu is the king of disinformation and propaganda.
Here we go, a little bit more here.
Civilians, families, they fire terror weapons on civilians. And often they use cluster bombs, which are forbidden by international law.
Hold on for a minute, Sabrina. Okay. I did a documentary in Lebanon, and Israel dropped millions of cluster bombs on the Lebanese during the Hezbollah-Israeli war. We're talking about 2005 and 2006. And the UN is still cleaning those cluster bombs up today. They look like children's toys. Kids are getting their hands blown off for years in Lebanon. And when the MAG unit, which is the UN's mine clearing unit, they asked the Israelis for years for the mission plans that mapped out where those bombs were dropped so that the teams could go and clear them. And guess what? and they did thousands of missions, dropped millions of cluster bombs on Lebanon, and they would not cooperate with the United Nations. Israel would not give the targeting data over to those teams, so they basically just blew them off. That's Israel, and that was under Netanyahu. So for him to say that, to even talk about cluster warheads, it's just beyond laughable, and it's just sinister to a degree that's hard to explain.
Exactly. We can only do so much of him, but you guys, you get the point here. All of a sudden, he's the victim because it's happening to these things, or Israel is getting attacked. All of a sudden, everybody needs to stop in their tracks and they need to do whatever they can to help them. And there is a lot of pressure that is being put on the U.S. allies to come in and intervene here. Donald Trump just made a statement threatening Iran. He made this on Truth Social. It's making the rounds on social media as well. One of the threats here, which I believe to be a war crime.
That if Iran doesn't open up the Strait of Hormuz within 48 hours, the United States will, quote, hit and obliterate their various power plants, starting with the biggest first. We're going to continue to monitor any breaking developments out of the Middle East, obviously in response to this. Jason, I want to go to you first.
So I just want to focus on his statement here. To me, this is a war crime, that if they don't open the Strait of Hormuz within 48 hours, the U.S. is going to obliterate their power plants, starting with the biggest one first. Like, again, it's all out there in the open. And I don't even know how. I feel like this. If the U.S. could do that, Patrick, wouldn't they have done that already?
Well, it's no, because targeting a power plants systematically, and the U.S. would go for all of them. Okay, that is one of the final cards you would pull. So this is the problem. The United States has painted itself into a corner, and on escalation, they've created a trap for themselves politically because they've front-loaded expectations from the beginning that this decapitation, they did this during the protests back in the U.S. and Israel, and probably the British intelligence as well, were involved in fomenting violence on the streets of Tehran and across the country to try to create a color revolution. And then Trump came out and said, rise up and take over your institutions and we'll be there. And the idea was, if they could weaken Iran politically, that then the airstrikes would begin there, and it would be easy. It'd be a walk in the park. It'd be another Venezuela. At least that's what the White House's plan A was. They didn't have a plan B. And so plan B is just massive escalation and really kill your way to victory, bomb your way to victory. And the problem is that's going after the electric and power infrastructure is the final card. But see, what they're not saying on Fox, the geniuses, the Rhodes Scholars at Fox fail to inform their audience that Iran has said, if you do that, we will then destroy all of the power and energy infrastructure in the region and in Israel. So what are these people going to do in the U.S. media? They're going to say, oh my God, look what the Iranians did. This is an unprovoked attack by the Iranians. They're a sinister terrorist state and whatever. These people are just so bereft of any kind of ethics in journalism, and the politicians a moral vacuum that is just unfathomable at this point. And so that's the thing. There will be retaliation, and they only have themselves to blame because, again, they started this war to begin with. They opened the escalation ladder up. Israel and the U.S. did. So whatever comes after that, worse. I have to remind people of this. They used peace negotiations where Iran was giving concessions. Concessions that they could never have even gotten in previous years. And the U.S. and Israel used that as cover for a sneak attack because they wanted this war. When they thought they could win this war in a few days, and now we're into the fourth week now, and there's no end in sight, and now they're scrambling behind the scenes for a ceasefire. The United States is. That's my understanding of the true situation, because the U.S. is running out of munitions and they're running out of interceptors to protect Israel, to protect U.S. facilities. And so this is a desperate move by Trump. And it's what this is going to do is guarantee that this is going to be a long war, because Iran will recover. I mean, I hate to say it, but you can do whatever you want to the Iranians. They're not going to capitulate. Okay, they're just going to harden their positions. They're going to dig in deeper. There's going to be more solidarity amongst the people and more anti-American and anti-Israeli fervor. And any allies that get involved and decide to go shoulder to shoulder with Trump on this, they're then going to draw the ire, and they're going to be the sort of generational enemies of the Iranians. And let me tell you, this young generation in Iran, they weren't even born when the Islamic Revolution happened. And they're always the target of these soft power operations by the West to kind of bring in this kind of liberal Western ideas and mentality and so forth, color revolutions. They've lost them because even the people who went through the revolution haven't seen an attack by the West on Iranian soil like this. So this has sharpened the blade of the Islamic Revolution for the next 50 years, because that's how long, that's from 1980 till now, we're talking about 47 years. Add another 50 now, and it's going to be even sharper because they've seen how ruthless, how violent, and how sneaky and dastardly the Americans and the Israelis and the European glad-handers and the British, who are basically enabling this, calling it collective defense, when quite clearly this is an illegal, undeclared illegal war of aggression. This is a violation of every international law, every treaty, every institution or convention that the West have ever signed on to. And these they have no excuse at this point. Trump has to double down. The U.S. has to double down. They have no choice. The expectations are so high. The political price that Trump is going to pay is going to be so great if he backs down. But it's going to be, I think, even worse if they go forward. It's going to be worse for the United States. It's going to be worse for the global economy. And we're in a death spiral here that is just something else. And the only thing that's going to save this would be a mutiny by the U.S. military, that there would be some kind of a power struggle within the U.S. military, and that would bring this to a grinding halt, because they're really the only key left that could really stop the escalation. Politically, the Democrats are completely supine because half of them want to see this war. That's a problem. And then the Republicans forget it. They've got war fever, and half of them are Christian Zionist zealots who think this is accelerating the end times and the return of Jesus Christ and Armageddon. So you can't do anything with them. So what's left on the U.S. side? And forget about the Israelis. Netanyahu is completely dug in, unless there's a political upheaval in Israel. So what I'm saying here, Sabrina, is the potential solution, the off-ramps here are political. They're political in Israel and they're political in the U.S. And one European country would just take one major UN Security Council member or NATO member to come up and say, that's it. This needs to end now. We're breaking off relations with the U.S. if they don't cool down on this. Otherwise, we're going to sanction Israel and maybe whatever the U.S. It's going to take something extraordinary like that to wake up the world. Because right now, we're sleepwalking into World War III right now, and an economic deprivation globally that we have not seen in our lifetimes. And so that's what's at stake.
I think so as well. I think one of those allies is going to have to really stand up. I know Spain has been speaking out in some way, shape, or form, but they're really going to have to put their feet down here. I do want to show people something else that's happening with the Strait of Hormuz right now. This was shared by Glenn Deason. And this is the economic impact that we could be facing here. Check this out.
Have you ever seen a traffic jam that could crash the world economy? This is the Strait of Hormuz. Right now, hundreds of massive oil tankers are sitting motionless in the water, waiting on a single decision from Iran. These ships carry 20% of the world's oil, but they are being held back by a new kind of invisible gate. Iran is reportedly demanding that any ship passing through must pay for its cargo in Chinese yuan instead of US dollars.
That part right there, Patrick.
Yeah, this the petro yuan. So now this video is a little bit over dramatic in the sense that it's This isn't officially a thing, but there are reports that these transactions have happened on specific occasions. It does point to a bigger discussion. But the important part about this, while that petro-yuan is huge, if we step back and take the 50,000-foot view, what's more important is that Iran has not closed the Straits of Hormuz. They're open for business, but not for everybody. And so if you're Chinese or you're Iranian, the U.S. has gone and lifting sanctions on Iranian oil to try to get product on the market, lifting sanctions on Russian oil to try to get product on the market. I mean, so it's not closed. It's only closed to some. So that's actually the story, is that the straits are not closed, not to everybody, only to some. And it really comes down to politics in the end. And that's also a potential off-ramp. If some Gulf states came in and said, hey, we want to deal with Iran on this, we're going to do our oil in Juan, we're going to pay our sort of, toll fare or whatever, and they're going to let our oil out. Okay, fine, deal. You can do this around the United States. You don't need to go through Washington. And that's why what Iran has done is quite powerful in terms of the realignment of geopolitics in the region and globally, because they're now the regional hegemon, because they're enforcing this. They're changing the economic capital flows in the region, and they're doing it through the use of force, but only out of they were forced into this position. This is not a war that Iran initiated. It's a war that the U.S. wanted. It's what Trump wanted, what Netanyahu wanted. It's what the military-industrial complex wanted. It's what U.S. big oil wanted. Because let me tell you, the restriction of this supply into the global market from the Persian Gulf, guess who's benefiting from this? U.S. oil and gas companies, who are now charging a massive premium for fracked LNG into the European market to fill the gap from the missing Qatari LNG from the South Pars gas field. And the Qataris stopped production anyway at the beginning of this war. So who's going to fill that gap? The United States is going to fill that gap. And they're going to do it at a premium. They're going to bankrupt the Europeans like they did after the Nord Stream pipeline, same thing, and the U.S. oil. And so the big oil, that's Trump's base. The oil magnates in Texas are 100% behind Trump. This is why the Venezuela play looks like it was strategic in advance of this war back in December. And so you can kind of get a good view here of the broader kind of energy politics and what the U.S. is using for leverage here. They think in America that they can ride out a global storm. They think they can ride out a global storm. Big oil make massive profits. They're happy to let the Russians have a little economic relief through this, but this is a huge mistake. And I'll tell you why. The last thing I'll say here, the United States economy is so dependent on oil and gas that the U.S. supply alone is not enough for our economy in order to suppress inflation, because there's petroleum in everything, and the United States industries buy it from all over the place at what are normally regular market prices. What Trump has done is distort the market through this military action that and the subsequent events that have cascaded after that to create an abnormal market that is going to be a driver for inflation in the U.S. and globally. It's going to cause contractions in the global market. A global recession most certainly is on the cards. It's already begun, actually, and in the United States as well. So the question is why? Who benefits from this? It doesn't look like the U.S. really benefits from it. Maybe small special interest groups in certain sectors benefit, and the Israelis apparently benefit, but do they really benefit from this? This is completely insane. This project, whoever dreamt this up, has gone off the rails, in my opinion, so badly, unless that was the intention, to wreck the global economy and perhaps come in with some new system. That's up for a different discussion, basically.
That's what it seems like. Like that's the goal, to wreck the global economy. And then there's also the question of the Houthis, who did issue, also known as Ansar Allah from Yemen. They did issue a statement recently that says that they are ready And Iran is saying that if the U.S., which Donald Trump is threatening to do, that if the U.S. tries to take Karg Island, which like physically take Karg Island, the Houthis have every right to be activated and to get involved. And we're talking about a very solid, powerful, group there that really has nothing to lose after, especially like for those who are not aware, Saudi Arabia attacked Yemen for years through the help of the United States and U.S. weapons. So when you see like these statements from Ansar Allah, they have nothing to lose. And at that point, this becomes even more like escalated.
And let me tell you about that. So the Ansar Allah is fully capable, the Yemenis. They're fully capable of closing the Bab el-Mandeb Straits or making life extremely uncomfortable for any shipping in the Red Sea. Now, the Saudi port is Yanbu. I think it's called Yanbu. It's in the Red Sea. It's the Petroline pipeline that runs east to west. That's the bypass for the Persian Gulf. So if the Straits of Hormuz close, then you could activate the petrol line or up production so that ships could come and fill up at that port, at Saudi port on the Red Sea coast. Well, Ansar Allah has already attacked the port facilities there before, and successfully. It's well within the range of not even the Houthis' top end in terms of missiles and drones. So they're doing 1.5 million barrels a day, but the shortfall for the global market from the Straits of Hormuz is about 8 million barrels short. So whatever Saudi can do, 1.5 million from their petrol line, Red Sea port, it's not going to be enough. They can up production, but again, that's going to take time. And even if they got up to 4 million barrels a day, the Houthis could shut that down in an afternoon. So it's not really a viable plan. Netanyahu is he's now talking publicly about building, everyone's pipeline should be going through Israel. He's just said in the last couple of days. And that's the solution, is Israel will be the sort of hub for global energy and in the East Mediterranean. And now you can see that's actually one of the big parts of the agenda for Israel. So a lot of this stuff is feeding into that long-term agenda. They're gambling that they're going to defeat Iran, that they're going to basically get the rest of the region under their thumb, and they're basically going to effectively take control of the energy in the region. And let me tell you, this also includes regime change in any of these Gulf states that are not going to hand over a significant amount of control of their energy resources to Israel and the U.S. in future. They're out. So you're talking about all these monarchs. They're gonna be hightailing it to their penthouses in Paris, London, New York, Miami, and wherever else. Okay, that's the future of the region. It's not going to be Gulf monarchs, and so if you look at how they've created a situation where Iran is forced to wreck or retaliate to hit energy infrastructure, oil refineries, etc., in Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Kuwait, and if they go for desalination plants, if that becomes a target back and forth, and Israel has plenty of desalination plants as well, then the region is unlivable. They're betting on this being the case for the Gulf side, because the Americans and the Israelis would love to get rid of these monarchs, these families. They would love to get rid of them and replace them with U.S. puppets or U.S. Israeli puppets. That's the future for them anyway of the region, is to be Arab free as much as possible, believe it or not. So this is the big colonial picture that the Zionist Greater Israel Project envisions. 50, they're thinking 100 years down the road. So, and we need to get our heads around the fact that these people are planning way ahead. And we're only reacting to things that are happening, day by day, week by week.
Yeah. I just want to remind people too, when Netanyahu showed that Greater Israel project map, that included parts of Jordan and Saudi Arabia. And so it's just, I don't know. Like, again, a lot of it is money. They're connected to the US and they have these deals with the United States and these states that have been created in the Gulf, right? Like the UAE, like Qatar, they're just basically Western puppets. Like that's kind of how I see them. But the last thing I wanted to show is that something else happened. Why these attacks were happening with Iran? Apparently, it seems like Israelis felt as though the response to that was to go and raid the West Bank. They were attacking Palestinians in the West Bank after that attack on Dimona. This was their response to it. And by the way, Firkin has a good point. You won't see this on CNN or Fox News. They were raiding the homes. They were setting homes on fire. This was right after that attack.
من المنطقة الجنوبية الشرقية من المنطقة الشرقية على المنازل المستوطنين.
And there's even more videos of this. But this happened. It's almost like the response was, let's go inflict pain on the Palestinians in the West Bank because Iran just struck us. It's like, let's go hit those that we know don't have the tools that Iran has, because we know they can't fight back in the same way. It's absolutely disgusting.
And they're unarmed. You know, Palestinians aren't allowed to have weapons in the West Bank, but the settlers are armed to the teeth, and they're protected by the IDF. So they're allowed to run what is effectively a pogrom. Okay, that is what you're seeing there. That's Kristallnacht. Okay, that's the actual Kristallnacht. That is the pogrom in real time. You know, it's not, to me, it's not as severe as the genocide in Gaza yet, but it's the same thing. It is the early stages of another ethnic cleansing and genocide operation. That's what they've done, but they do it incrementally in the West Bank. And the Israelis have always done this. Whenever there's something in Gaza, you see massive incursions in the West Bank, because they're just opportunists. They look at the war in Iran, or, you know, the genocide in Gaza and the war going on there as kind of a cover for incrementally displacing native Palestinians, burning their houses, kicking them out of their houses, burning their olive groves, killing them, harassing them, arresting them, whatever, to make life unlivable for them. And if whoever is too stubborn to leave, well, they'll kill them eventually. And now they have license to do just that from the likes of the Ben-Gvirs of the world, from the Bezalel Smotrichs of the world, from the Benjamin Netanyahus of the world, that are giving the full 24/7 dog whistle to go and do whatever you want to the native Palestinian population. And where's the West? Nowhere. You know, what about human rights, international law? No, it's too much. The West can't cope because they're drowning in the malaise of their own sort of moral hypocrisy and their own role in undermining and trashing international law and the international system by basically turning a blind eye or even overtly backing Israel's genocide in Gaza. And this war in Iran is just to me, it's just an extension of what we've seen in Gaza. This scorched earth policy, where the whole thing about prior to October 7th, 2023, was that there would be countries, even Israel, would observe not using their modern military indiscriminately against densely populated civilian areas. That's all out the window now. I mean, Israel has done that before, but on very small scale compared to what they've done post October 7th. Now the United States have basically given that a green light. So the U.S. is also potentially going to return to its barbaric past. And during the Vietnam War, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, Dresden, Pyongyang, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I mean, the United States has plenty of these massive, genocidal acts by modern military, and all the conventions and the genocide convention and all of the diplomacy, the efforts have tried to rein that in, and they kind of did after Vietnam. It was a different type of warfare. The U.S. adopted a more surgical military doctrine that was championed by people like Donald Rumsfeld, that the United States its air power, its deploy, its surgical, its special forces and teams, regime change, very quick results. None of this scorched earth killing masses of civilians, because they ruled that just didn't work in Vietnam. Well, we haven't learned those lessons, have we? Because the Trump administration is basically a facelift of Lyndon Baines Johnson. It may be slightly crazier even than LBJ, but that's kind of where we're at right now. It's no different. It's the same rhetoric, same type of militarism rhetoric from Hegseth that we saw for motivating the military during the 60s. Same type of jingoistic kind of mad sort of hoorah type of rhetoric. It's the same. The U.S. has just turned the clock back. That's all that these people have done. They're absolute revanchionists in the colonial sense. And that to me, and even going back further, I would say this is medieval. What they're doing to Cuba is medieval. This is siege warfare in the open, starving, creating famines, punishing whole populations. That's what medieval kings did to tribes and ethnic groups. They thought nothing of just massacring, and killing 100,000 or 50,000. This is where the U.S. is at right now. And we're on the cusp of a very dangerous sort of escalation just in general of what's happening in Washington. And what horrifies me, the last thing I'll say, I'm sorry for the rant, Sabrina, but it really is, I think we're in a critical stage because there's no opposition. There's plenty of people in Washington, especially on the Democrat side, that could form a credible and a loud opposition to this, but they're cowards. They're absolute cowards because many of them have been co-opted into this machine themselves. And that makes for a huge problem right now in America. How are we going to restrain what we're seeing now? It's unbelievable. If you told me 10 years ago that this would happen, I would have said, no way. No way. 5 years ago, I would have said, no way. And look at it. It's happening.
Yeah. Well, Patrick, thank you. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you coming on. Where can people check out your work?
Yeah, 21stcenturywire.com. That's our website. We're an independent media platform, been going since 2009. I'm also on Substack, patrickhenningsen.substack.com. You can drop those links in the description, or people hopefully will be able to find us there. All my work's there. And I'm on other shows as well, podcasts and whatnot.
Thank you, Patrick.
My pleasure. Thanks.
Hey guys, this was a Sabby clip. If you like what you saw, hit that like button and subscribe.